The skies of Earth were on fire. Not literally, mind you. This fire was different and far more beautiful. Humanity's great and mighty star, Sol, in his last act before being swallowed by the edge of the horizon, ignited the clouds in his gaze with orange and purple, arranged in an elaborate blazing tapestry. I watched as the grand act of cosmic creation sunk lower and lower, out of sight, coating my face in a fading warmth before he was drowned by the glittering ocean that stretched out endlessly beyond, put to slumber by the gods. Sol would abdicate his dominance over the Terran skies but for a night. In his sleep, Sol's sister, Luna, scarred and pale but unwavering, appears, taking her brother's power and shining in a silent but brilliant defiance. She would give the other stars the bravery to shine with her, even if just for a few precious and beautiful hours. The next day, as Sol is reborn again and rises from the mountains in the east, the stars would retreat back into the abyss of space, hiding from his light in fear it may smite their own. This story of bravery and fear repeated itself every day, playing itself out across the heavens for all of Gaia's children to witness. As it had been for 1,000 millennia, and as it would be for 1,000 millennia after. This tale would play out until the end of time, when Sol would surrender himself to death, and drag his domain and his sister down with him, making true every human religion's depiction of the apocalypse, as the cradle of their race was ripped apart beneath them. Either in joy or in sadness, it was enough to make me shed a tear. I let it run down to my chin before wiping it away and blinking. I bid the sun goodbye and turned around, back towards the city behind me. Back towards the raging fires inside it. Back towards the war. Humans had a name for this city that I could not pronounce, but the name was irrelevant. It had once been beautiful. It had played host to art and culture, unmatched in this part of the planet. Marvelous towers of simple but gorgeous architecture reached up like outstretched fingers trying to grasp at the clouds. They had been nothing like ours, our large spires of metal reaching so far up that the richest blue sky could be seen from its peaks. No, these were humble, with their patterned, shingled roofs and short, wide layers. They were unique, and even on this planet they were uncommon, save for this single island. Human cities were flawed in many ways, but there was no denying they were a pleasant sight. Regrettably, like too many other cities on this world, my people had brought war to it. Our crescent-shaped vessel, the Storm Splitter, glistened in Luna's chilling light, decorating it with a beauty it was undeserving of, as it rained rockets down on the city below, which illuminated its underbelly in a different, far less comforting orange than Sol gifted. The sight saddened me. All the toil men untold had poured into building this marvel, torn down in one single night. By morning there would not be anything left. Only ash-coated foundations and charred, twisted wood piles, where buildings and homes had once stood. Blue flashes whipped about between the buildings as my king clashed with simple human blades. It had reached the courtyards and patterned gravel gardens outside the tallest building, the palace. I could see them, even at this distance. Their short but ferocious figures shouting battle cries in a language I did not speak, clad in elegant woven armor instead of fiber and steel plate. Weak, but cultured. My brothers and sisters in arms towered over them, their twin-pronged blades easily searing through weave and flesh and bone. Man's own weapons shattered, warped, and simply blunted against our own protections. These human warriors cried out in agony and fury, refusing to show any fear even as they faced down death. I couldn't tell if they were brave for not showing it, or foolish for refusing to run, and dying dishonest to themselves, but it wouldn't matter anyway. They still died screaming. My people always prided themselves on seeking glory and giving honor in battle, but there was no glory in this. This was slaughter with no exception. No risk. Hardly any of our blood mixed into a purplish hue with the ocean of their own red we had spilled. Honor was not burning their homes. Honor was not killing their men and sending the rest screaming into the night, running from silver demons they didn't understand and couldn't kill. I was not sure of the reason, the motivation, that justified this purge of life. Earth, with its primitive technologies and closed-minded peoples, was of no threat or consequence to us, and yet we were here anyway. We were many, and they were few. They killed one of ours in a fair battle, and we killed a generation of them in cold blood. It was unfair. It was cruel. And I was a part of it. I lowered my head from the light and began making my way down off my perch, towards the burning city and its crumbling stone walls. Women with faces reddened by tears ran past me in the other direction, dragging screaming children with youthful, plump faces behind them. They cried and held up wooden religious effigies as I bounded past them, some tripping and falling into the wet trenches of their crop fields trying to flee. I pressed a button on my chest piece, and my helmet rose up, sealing around me and obscuring my face to the terrified defenders of this doomed city. I made no effort to cut down the fleeing peasants and simply kept my stride. Arrows came flying over the walls at me, as my pace quickened. These simply fashioned projectiles, which I had only ever seen in relic houses as a child, bounced harmlessly off the second skin protecting me. The arched gateway leading into the defiled village had already been savaged by my kin, who had simply charged through the door and shattered it. The defenders on the other side of it laid in decaying heaps, their spears snapped and blunted. Only 2 of them had managed to puncture the armor, and our oxidized blood anointed the tips of their spearheads. The blazing archway of wood and simple plaster collapsed on me as I marched through. I grunted and shoved off the beams of wood before continuing. The screams of the terrified and dying warriors of man pierced through my helmet, and my face twitched at the sounds as I continued running. Buildings around me were obliterated by fire from our ship, showering me in splinters that felt no more painful than raindrops. Still, my heart quickened, and I could feel my ears throbbing as I closed on the last dying sounds of battle. I slowed to a stop as I reached the courtyard. The fighting since ended, and a mass grave in its place. My fellow warriors moved among the bodies like wraiths, inspecting every limp form on the ground to make sure they would not raise themselves up to fight us again. An extra crushing of every neck, an extra puncture through each fragile skull. I took the moment to draw my own blade and ready it. The hilt fit comfortably into my glove grip as I flipped a switch under the guard. At once, a pronged steel blade sprung from the weapon's blade. The perfect blue glow of the Sabal's steel made even more brilliant under Luna's gaze. Our weapon so brilliant, so cultured, so unfitting a tool of crude murder. Shingles of the palace started falling off in waves, as flames greedily snaked their way up the walls and through the windows in an all-consuming destruction. It was a miracle the towering structure hadn't already collapsed. I found it hard to believe their leader, their daimyo, as they called him, was still in there. But he was. There was a moment we all stood in silence among the mounds of corpses and stared at each other. We could have waited for the building to crumble, could have summoned a torrent of fire from the storm splitter, our silver stain on the night sky to instantly shatter the fragile monument, or could have simply sliced out its already strained supports and watched the building crumble down on itself and leave an indent in the ground where its foundation had been. Made him come to us. Forced him to come out or die, in which case he would die by our swords, instead of his own home. But we didn't have to wait. He came to us. 12 men, some staggering, some walking upright, like the Inferno hadn't kissed the edges of their armor, emerged from the dark orange of the front entrance, blades drawn. Their eyes, watering as they choked on smoke and ash, glared at us with pure hatred, and our helmets did not give them the ability of meeting our own, emotionless gazes. The last one to emerge wore a mask himself, made of wood, and covering his lower face with the visage of a snarling demon carved into it. His eyes regarded my kin like a tactician, assessing our armor silently behind his mask's bared fangs. His armor was decorated with ropes and knots, and 2 large gleaming metal horns jutted out from his helmet. He locked his gaze on me, and his eyes carried with them wrinkles of age, stress, and previous battles that we knew nothing of. There was no doubt. This man was the daimyo. We ceded some ground to the humans, backing up further into the courtyard as they filed down the stairs and made a wall, with the daimyo at the formation center. The palace moaned in protest with its final labored breaths, and its previously formidable wooden pillars, broken under abuse and fire, died with loud and horrible cracks. The palace collapsed inward, and the third floor folded on itself, plunging through the levels below it and dragging the second down with it, before striking the foundation with tremendous force. A wave of ash, dust, and debris blasted out at us in a wave, enveloping both our soldiers. Neither one of us flinched at its destruction, and even with the collapse the humans never broke their stare on us. The daimyo belted something I assumed was either a command or a battle cry, and a chorus of shouts soon joined his own voice as the 12 men charged at us through the dust. I will admit the tactic was clever. Taking advantage of the dust clouds settling over the yard to obscure their advance, they charged straight at us, contorting their faces with horrible screams and running into the waiting jaws of death. The daimyo came straight at me. His blade, a mastercraft of alloyed metal, folded over 1,000 times, likely several generations older than its bearer, and engraved with a symbolic marking of one of Earth's plants, came down over my head in a single arcing motion. The sword dug itself into my helmet, with enough force to stagger me backwards several paces. As he ripped the weapon free, my helmet's inside display flickered violently, and high-pitched static sang painfully in my ears. I had little time to recover from the first blow, before a second embedded itself into the plating around my stomach. He was smart, aiming for gaps where the armor was thinner, trying to cleave off limbs with fast and heavy strokes. I caught the next strike with my free forearm's plate and shunted it away before thrusting my own weapon at him. He jerked himself away from it at the last possible moment, and his shoulder pauldron smoked as its straps came undone. It shook free of his arm as he readjusted and redoubled his attack. 3 quick jabs into my chest plate from the man blunted the tip of his sword and ripped my breath from me. With his first strike, I could feel the metal of my armor wrench inwards and dig into my skin. He was good. I blocked the next strike with my blade and could see sparks fly as his sword visibly heated up at the point of impact, turning a warm orange as the smoke rose off both our weapons. The daimyo studied the heated section for a brief second before lunging at me again, this time aiming for my sword. He deliberately scraped the tip of his sword against mine twice more before drawing back his now glowing curved blade and driving it down past my guard and into my shoulder. A freezing hot pain screamed out at me as the superheated weapon split through my armor and into my skin. My legs buckled, and I fell to one knee, still trying to stop the weapon from digging in further. For a moment I stared up at the man, expecting to see a twisted smile of satisfaction at the pain he inflicted, but he only regarded me with a solemn gaze, like he regretted having to draw blood even from me. I grabbed him around the chest and threw him backwards, the shoulder wound crying out to me again as the blade came away with him, licking my steel once again before disappearing into the settling debris cloud. I touched the wound with 2 fingers and rubbed the thin blue blood between them. I winced as I stood up to face the human again. The warrior had already risen on his end of the yard, blade ready and waiting for me. The battle around us had faded to silence, and among the smoke I could make out the looming omens of my kin, watching the 2 of us in silence. The daimyo angled his brightened sword and charged at me. I pushed myself towards him in 2 great bounds, and the distance between us shortened to nothing in a single second. I swung at him without thinking, and was immediately met by a familiar searing pain in my side. My stride slowed to a stagger, and after another 2 steps I found myself on the floor again, hitting my head hard against the trampled ground. My ears rang. With what felt like all of my strength, I propped myself up on my wounded shoulder and looked back, ready to face my enemy before he could deliver a finishing blow. I expected the warrior to be standing over me again, or being overcome by my siblings, but he wasn't. On the other side of the courtyard where I was standing a moment ago, the body of the great human warrior had crumpled on the ground. My kin had not moved, and I could feel them watching the both of us, expecting something. Stowing my sword on my hip, I tried to stand up and fell to my knees once again. The ringing had been replaced by a returning throb, and I had to fight the urge to clutch my chest as I fought to steady my breathing. On the second attempt to stand, I was successful, but I could feel hot blood dripping down my leg, leaving a thin trail behind me as I shambled over to the limp form of the daimo. Moonlight painted him in a pale grey as I knelt next to him and felt around his neck, pressing on a vein and finding a pulse. It was faint, and I knew he would die soon. With a light push, I rolled the man onto his back and met his eyes. They just barely met mine in return. Colour was already leaving his face, and I couldn't tell apart the ashes from his skin. His mask had come off at some point during the chaos, revealing a thin pattern of white facial hair beneath it, surrounding his thin, dried lips. A stream of scarlet flowed from the side of his mouth, getting worse as he coughed up more. His head lolled to one side, and my hand quickly darted down to support it. His eyes fell on the hilt of my sword, and he made sure I knew he was looking at it. He looked back at me, straining as he did, and gave me a wordless nod. I knew what he asked for. I drew the blade from my side again, silently and slowly, like I needed to be careful with it as I was with him. One swift flick of my finger, and the blue steel blazed open in my grip once again. 2 tears flowed down the daimyo's cheeks out of his watery eyes, which had already lost focus. He closed his eyes slowly, either to blink away the tears or relax in his last moments. He did not open them again. With one shaking 5-fingered hand, he blindly fumbled with the tires in his armor and pulled his chest piece out of the way. I lined up my blade with his chest and without a lowered gaze, thrust it into his chest and through his heart with a single swift motion. He coughed again and drew in one final shallow, rasping breath as his undershirt was stained red. Within a moment, every muscle of his that had been tensed went limp, and the human died quietly in my arms. I still think about him. I haven't returned to his world, to his scarred nation and his mourning people. None of us speak of the battle. None of us pass the story down to our young, and only silence follows our remembrance of that night. The knowledge of what occurred will die with us. Sometimes I sit alone for hours at a time and I think back to that night, to leaving the maimed planet with his dried blood coating my arms. I force myself to relive that night every day, to remember the human's face and the tragedy of his passing. Even if no one ever knows of this, to forget feels wrong. This writing will be buried with me, along with the rest of my works. I do not expect anyone to find this, but to anyone who does, I have only this to say. My name is Duomno Vals, the resilience of Al, and the only son of Sophia and Rhaesgar. For 87 orbits I served the sovereignty as a devoted warrior to my people, even when I was asked to sin in its name. Though many centuries have passed and mankind has evolved greatly in their quest to grasp the stars, their resolve has not changed. The impervious warrior spirit is a flame that still kindles in the fires of human hearts. Throughout all of my times, all of my travels, and all of my truths, I have never forgotten where true honor and fortitude reside. Always respect the human warrior.